we are here today for arraignment in this matter on behalf of Mr. Rittenhouse. Mr. Richards, do you acknowledge receipt of a copy of the information?
Your Honor, I would acknowledge receipt of the information, waive the reading of the information. I have went over all the potential penalties with my client. He's aware of them. I've also e-filed a jury demand on count 6 for a 6-person jury and the $36 fee earlier today.
All right, thank you. I assume then at this point you're going to be entering pleas?
Yes, prepared to enter not guilty pleas to all the charges contained therein.
All right, thank you very much. Not guilty pleas to all counts contained in the information are noted and entered for the record. Matter shall now be counted for further proceedings before the Honorable Bruce E. Schrader presiding, and any and all previously imposed bond conditions and issues of bail have remain in full force and effect. Do you understand that, Mr. Rittenhouse?
Yes, sir.
All right, welcome back to Law and Crime Report. That is Kyle Rittenhouse in hot water again. You guys may remember that he already had bail problems with respect to him drinking in a bar and then throwing out white supremacist symbols, as well as associating with individuals identified with being with white supremacist groups. The judge had rebuked him for that, said that he can no longer do those things, but he's back in the news now for having violated his bail conditions by not informing the court and the probation department that he changed his address. Let me get right to our great guest today, Gigi Gonzalez, a criminal defense attorney, the daughter of a criminal defense attorney. We share that with one another, so I always mention that. Started in the back rooms. He's got a great criminal defense practice, always an awesome guest here at the Law and Crime Network, as well as Joseph Scott Morgan, who I was just on the phone with yesterday, helping me out with a case. Joseph, thank you again. Joseph has established the national training guidelines for medical legal death investigations, worked in the coroner's office. He is the go-to guy with applied forensic sciences, and also is the author of Blood Beneath My Feet. Guys, I'm going to go right to Gigi on this one. Gigi, you know, if it weren't for those who make poor decisions, people like me and you and prosecutors and judges wouldn't have a job. I mean, what is this guy is playing with fire? Gigi, the #1 condition is that they want to make sure they have contact and that you notify them of address changes. What's going on here?
Mostly when you're out on bond is that you just walk around and then you show up to your court date. And that's not the case here. Kyle Rittenhouse is out on $2 million bond with special conditions. And he's got to check in and make sure that the court knows where he is at all times. And by not informing the court that he had a change of address, that's a very serious slip up. And part of his conditions of bond is to make sure that he avails himself to the court. And by not letting the court know when he leaves or moves and does whatever he does, change his address, then that tells the court that he is not availing himself to the court. And the judge would be within his rights to revoke his bond and hold him until his trial.
Yeah, Joseph, I mean, the argument that's being made by the defense, as best as we can understand it right now, is that he had to leave that location because his safety was in jeopardy, and that they were willing to let prosecutors know this, but they did not want to release the address. Still, that does not comport with court conditions. There are other measures that can be taken for the safety. And I think he's exposed to a significant problem here with the judge potentially revoking the bail now that he's got 2 strikes on his bail record.
Yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse represents a flashpoint in American history at this point. And so not that this would be bad under any other circumstances, but he's a young kid that needs to be made aware by counsel that the white hot lights of the world are upon him, and everything that he does, every step that he takes, everywhere he goes, there are people watching that he might not even be aware of, the least of which is not the prosecutor. So yeah, it would seem that it would be advisable for counsel to have made an appointment specifically with the judge. That, you know, why not, you know, go in and have a conversation with them, even via Skype or Zoom or however, and sit down and kind of talk about this. And, you know, obviously the prosecutor would have to be there. I'm concerned about my client's welfare. And we want to stay within the parameters that have been set forth, but you cannot just kind of ignore these types of directives. It'll get you in deeper.
Yeah, Gigi, to that point, I can't imagine that a lawyer would advise a client to just leave a location without seeking some sort of intervention with the court. And what happened in this particular case, as best as we can understand, is a court notice was sent to the previous address where he was supposed to be staying. It came back unreturned, and when detectives went to that location, somebody else was living in the house, which would suggest to me this had been going on for a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it had to have been enough time that somebody moved into the place and Kyle Rittenhouse is no longer available there. And Joseph made a great point. If he really is concerned with his safety and is, hiding out to avoid a threat of danger, then it's his responsibility to advise his lawyer of that so that the lawyer can get in touch with the state, get in touch with pretrial services to make sure that everybody is on the up and up on the situation. Because otherwise, without informing the court, without going through these avenues, it just looks like he's trying to evade court detection, which is a major problem for folks who are out on bond, who are telling the court that they can be trusted out on bond.
Yeah, and Gigi, I'll add to that add-on bond with a significant amount of money that has been raised by third-party sources, which I would be arguing as a prosecutor increases his risk to flight. Excellent commentary, but it doesn't end there with Kyle Rittenhouse, because we've also found out, or have released to us, police tapes from when he was down in the police station. His mother was in the room, and the recording device is going on even when police officers aren't in the room. Let's take a listen.
So, can you guys delete my social media accounts? Like, after you guys get your warrant to go through all my shit, can you make sure everything, like, my social media is deleted?
I mean, we can't discuss the case with you, but we'll look into some stuff, okay? But at least there's a lot of pieces here, okay? Reach out to us, okay? That's your prerogative, reach out to us.
Okay, so there's a clip from when he was speaking to the detectives. A very interesting Miranda issue happened where he said that he wanted to get a lawyer, but he would keep on talking, and the police said, no, that's it, we have to shut it down. So how much of a statement they actually got from him, we don't know. But during part of the recording, when the police were not in the room, was dialogue going on between the mother and Kyle Rittenhouse, talking about social media and Facebook posts and hateful posts and calling him a white supremacist. And this seemed to be something that was very concerning to them. Joseph, I always say this, when you're going into those police stations, you're giving information and talking, even when no one else is in the room, everything is being recorded. And that may not necessarily be the look if it gets admitted at trial, that the defendant isn't concerned about the fact that 3 people were shot and that he's facing a murder charge, but rather he's worried about how he's being perceived on social media. What do you think?
Yeah, let me sound like a cool guy in the media now. I think the lexicon is the optics look bad. Isn't that what they all say? And so it's not a good look, kind of moving forward with this. Again, I go back to what I've earlier postulated over the fact that he is, I can't even begin to fathom the intensity with which he is being viewed by the world and by everybody that has interest in this case for whatever their motivations are. And so, any comments that you make in that environment, I often tell my students at Jacksonville State, when we're talking about interviewing people, one of the biggest mistakes that folks make in the general public is they think that they can cross swords with the police, with law enforcement, and not just one-on-one conversation. Police do this every day. They have fail-safes in place, and when you're in that room, you have to assume you're being recorded at all times.
Yeah, Joseph, that's a great point. And I've always said this, that we have won more cases as prosecutors because people decided that they were smarter than the police and they opened their mouths and they wind up giving a critical piece of information, maybe not even understanding how critical it is because they're not doing the investigation that ultimately led to their conviction that we otherwise would not have gotten. Gigi, there's also statements that the mother was making, calling him a train wreck in that interview, and him saying, I need help, something to the effect that I need therapy. Do you see those kind of statements being admitted in court? Is that go counter to his argument that this was self-defense?
You know, it could be used either way. I think that the defense would assert that, this person, this kid, a 19-year-old, was not equipped with the tools to successfully handle this type of conflict. And that's why he resorted to this situation. That's how I would use it as a defense attorney. But if I was the state, I'd be saying this is a person who's mentally unhinged. His mother says so. He says so. And, he had no business having a gun of this nature. He had no business at this protest handling this gun, and he had no business firing that gun because of his mental inability to appreciate what's going on here.
Yeah, and Joseph, I will add to Kyle Rittenhouse's self-defense claim that at one point he's indicating in that interview that's recorded that when I was being hit with a bat. So that's something that potentially would be useful to the defense in the case, because I think it's going to be an extraordinary case of what are the facts that support either self-defense or outright murder. It's literally, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, listen, you're a former homicide prosecutor. How many cases do you recall where you have videography of an event occurring? I mean, that's how unique this case is. The public is used to seeing things on social media and whatnot, but when you're looking at this simply from an investigative standpoint and from a prosecutorial standpoint, and from a defense standpoint, how often do you have evidence that is this strong, that it has this strong a narrative with it? I'll put it that way, and it's all going to depend upon how the defense and the prosecution frames this going forward.
Yeah, Gigi, that's such a good point Joseph is making. I started out as a baby prosecutor doing homicide cases where we couldn't even get DNA of blood. It was so new. And then on the other end, when I became the county prosecutor, we had all of these tools, all these forensic tools that Joseph is so good at explaining, and DNA. But moreover, we have social media and we have videography of these things. And these people, like the Capitol insurrection, have no problem posting their criminality online.
Yeah, citizen journalism has really done a number on folks' ability to evade the justice system. You have multiple witnesses who videotape the entire interaction. You now got Kyle Rittenhouse's, position on how the events transpired. It's really hard to go forward on any case, quite frankly, without a substantial digital record of the event. And even cases we've covered here, we've seen murders where we were able to determine who it was based on cameras that were on the streets and ATM videos and red light videos. And it's really difficult to get away with anything these days, and especially in such a public nature as this type of killing on a public street filled with protesters. It was really hard for Kyle Rittenhouse to be able to evade this type of charge.
Well, for many, many decades, they said you can run, but you cannot hide. But that's so true even to this day. Guys, we're going to take a break, but don't go anywhere because we have a special guest coming up, Brian Ross from the Law and Crime Network, with an exclusive on a story he's covering. We'll be right back. All right, awesome. We have Brian Ross with us, the host of Killer Cases, doing special segments on interesting cases like Brooke Schuyler Richardson. She was the 18-year-old that was pregnant. She indicated she had birthed a stillborn infant and buried it in the backyard. The question was this a murder or was this just abuse of a corpse? Well, she went to trial and the jury found her not guilty of the murder, not guilty of anything other than abuse of a corpse. She was placed on a 3-year period of kind of a review, but the judge terminated that earlier, only after having served 14 months. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about your show and what this case is about? And what are your thoughts about how crazy this is that this case keeps on going on?
It's amazing. It's one of a series of 10 killer cases that are on A&E at 10 o'clock tonight. And Rhonda Schwartz and I are executive producing the show. And this case was so fascinating because police were told after they discovered the body buried in her backyard where she had secretly dug a grave that according to the medical examiner, the bones appear to have been burned. So they get her in a confession to admit she set fire to the baby. Only later does the medical examiner say, I was wrong. the bones were not burned. So essentially, you have a false confession, which we see play out in the show. The prosecution went ahead with the case anyway, still stuck to the murder charges, even though they were able to show pretty clearly, I think, and you'll see in the case, that it would be impossible to burn a baby.
Brian, let's take a real quick look at a clip from your show, which I'm really excited about because nobody better than you guys to put this kind of thing together. Let's take a look and a listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because the defendant, Brooke Richardson, murdered a baby that she didn't want and never intended to keep.
She's a great student. She started doing competitive cheer outside of the school.
Skylar has just learned she's pregnant and she tells no one. Nobody knows about this.
Sometime when her mother, father, and brother were asleep, Skylar delivers a baby girl. She names her daughter Annabelle. And then she buries the remains in the backyard.
He did give birth to a newborn infant. He caused the death of that infant. She subsequently burned the infant.
They were on a one-way track to get her to confess so they could take her to jail.
Are you going to put me in jail because of that?
People were ready to convict. There was false information everywhere. It was ugly.
She was determined to keep her secret.
Skylar, if they do an autopsy on the baby and they find out that it was living at the time of the birth, then you will go to jail. I never meant to kill my baby.
Your wife is in a bar. You said she's unresponsive.
This is what he's going to tell you.
How to get out of that situation.
And I grabbed the gun.
Trying to find the first place to put a body.
No, sir. The only thing they could do was kill him.
You want to say anything? We, the jury, and to find the defendant.
Wow, what a great clip. I can't wait to watch this show. Going back to Skylar for a moment, Brian, there was allegations, from what I understand, by the family that this whole trial was poisoned in the court of public opinion through social media that to this day is a problematic safety issue for the family. What did you find out about that?
That absolutely is the case. And you watch the social media, you see they turned on Skylar very quickly. And it became an issue of whether even a child who was stillborn, was there a murder involved? Did she take any steps to prepare for the baby? There's no sign that she bought a bassinet or any kind of baby supplies. And the suggestion was she planned to kill that baby, whatever happened.
Hey, Brian, did you find anything out through this investigation and while you were putting this together that the public generally didn't get to know? Like, what was your feel and sense about how the prosecutors went about this case? Were they just grandstanding, or was there a legitimate basis for them to go forward with this trial?
Well, there may have been at first, but as you can see from some of those clips, the prosecutors did do a bit of grandstanding. They enjoyed being in front of the cameras. In a conservative Ohio county where this was seen as a positive, sort of a pro-life position that the prosecutor took. And what didn't come out was the fact that, Skylar had hidden this from her parents. She was afraid to tell her parents or anyone really that she was pregnant. She, in fact, gave birth the day after she had gone to the senior prom, hiding it even from her boyfriend.
Mm-hmm. And she had significant health issues with respect to an eating disorder, Brian. Was there anything that came out that
Right.
could have been the reason why the baby was born stillborn?
Could have been. It wasn't clear at all. And in fact, during the confession or the interrogation, she admitted she thought she heard a little cry, which was damning evidence. If there was a little cry, it meant the child was alive when it was born.
Well, okay, Brian Ross from the Law and Crime Network. You got to watch the show. It's going to be excellent. Brian, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Good to be here, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Okay, best of luck to you. All right, guys, watch that show with Brian. He's one of the best in the business, if not the best in the business. Breonna Taylor is back in the news. Detective Brett Hankinson, who is the individual that was charged, a police officer, former, that was charged with shooting in an adjacent apartment. As you know, there have been no charges that have been brought at all with respect to the killing of Breonna Taylor. Let's take a look at the clip of the prosecutor as they're speaking after the grand jury presentation.
Our team walked them through every homicide offense and also presented all of the information that was available to the grand jury, and then the grand jury was ultimately the one that made the decision about indicting Detective Hankinson for wanton endangerment. I think that in terms of what happened the wee hours of March 13th, in terms of that particular or specific date and what happened that night in the apartment, I think it is unlikely that there will be any additional prosecutions that come from that event itself.
Okay, we have Joseph and Gigi back with us. Gigi, I don't know, people are kind of using the very fancy legal term that we learned in law school, liar, liar, pants on fire. When we were talking about this before, I was saying, I hope this prosecutor presented evidence and gave the grand jury an opportunity to deliberate about the actions of the police officer vis-a-vis Breonna Taylor. And it turns out that the prosecutor didn't. Gigi, you know how grand juries work. I presented thousands of cases before grand juries. They are the prosecutor's playground. You get to limit the charges they listen to. You get to limit what evidence they listen to. Yet technically they have the ability to do things on their own. But this prosecutor, by not presenting evidence, did a disservice, not only to Breonna Taylor in my mind, but also the police officers who are under the suspicion here. What do you make of this debacle that the Attorney General has created in this scenario? Not to mention, a reasonable interpretation could be he was throwing shade about what happened in that grand jury.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting to watch Daniel Cameron's position from September 2020 after all the months of everything that's come out from the grand jurors accusing him of not bringing forward everything, and to Daniel Cameron trying celebrities like Meg the Stallion instead of focusing on bringing forward the evidence and facts for a grand jury to make an accurate decision on what charges to bring against who. You watch Daniel Cameron September 2020 and you think, oh, wow, he must have done everything possible. But you watch that same statement today, February 2021, and it's like he was so far off the beaten path here. It's really astounding that he's still in office, quite frankly, because this was a pretty bad handling of the entire case for Breonna Taylor. And it really does, like you said, it undermines the credibility of the DA's office, and it does no favors to the police department here by not bringing forward all of the evidence and all of the facts for a grand jury to determine, because it makes it look like they've got something to hide, Bob.
Yeah, and very well could have been that the officer that's returning fire had been shot and that it could have been considered a lawful shoot. So you're right. It not only affects Breonna Taylor, it affects the officers as well. Justice wasn't served. Joseph, I am always talking about this as much as I can, and I know reasonable minds can differ, that in my mind, you always get these squirrely things happening with attorney generals and prosecutors who are elected officials because they are catering to the court of public opinion. I was appointed. I had complete liberty. I couldn't lose my job. I was able to do what I felt was right, so the tail wasn't wagging the dog. Here, the detective, Brett Hankinson, is actually filing a motion asking for a change of venue, quoting, an avalanche of publicity, irresponsible publicity. Every time these prosecutors go out and gin up the crew with one of these press conferences, it makes motions like Hankinson is following right now more possible, more likely, or if it's not granted, it's creating an appellate issue down the road. I don't want that as a prosecutor.
No, and DAs and state AGs and this sort of thing. You're right on the money, Bob. They're political creatures at the end of the day. They like to talk about how they're serving the public and how they're looking out for our safety. But a big element of that is the court of public opinion. Some of these things that you see, you almost wish that prosecutors could live almost a monastic lifestyle where they're free of the news and they're free of social media and all this sort of thing, almost like a scientist, where you just want to hear the facts of the case. You don't want it to be tainted by anything else. And certainly the court of public opinion, because you're right. At the end of the day, in a case that is so polarizing across our country, you're the one that's the captain of the ship. And unfortunately, there's the opportunity that you might fly the plane into the side of the mountain.
Gigi, we've been having this debate. I can just tell you from New Jersey, we have very strict rules about what prosecutors can and cannot say to the public in order to ensure that there's a fair trial. Look, he's a police officer and charged with a crime, Hankinson. He is entitled to the presumption of innocence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, just like everybody else. But again, we can go out and just give the basics of what happened. We're not supposed to be doing press conferences that can poison the jury pool and agitate the public. So there's a big debate about this. Some people want more transparency. I think transparency is important, but we need to limit the statements that these prosecutors are making unless it goes to the four corners of what the indictment is, if there's an indictment. Secondly, and just real quick, respond to this, all that information could come out anyway. And you know where? In the courtroom. There's absolutely nothing wrong with stating your position as a prosecutor in the courtroom, which is completely protected. But yet they go outside, which is ethically, in my opinion, infirm. Not good.
Yeah, I hear you, Bob, and I totally understand the wanting to balance the need to protect the trial and the case and facts of it, while also being transparent to the public, especially with such a high-profile case such as the killing of Breonna Taylor. With that said, you have this door that you can potentially open where folks can move for change of venue thanks to the media circus and all of the hoopla surrounding this case. You open that door for defense attorneys to be able to make this particular argument, and then it also forces the entire defense to go out of the courtroom to defend their clients in the public stage by making these public statements about the case. And that's why we see so many defense attorneys, like, for example, Donna Rotono in the Harvey Weinstein case, made it so that she was always available to the media, not because she wanted to, but because she had to, because of the high profile publicity that surrounded that case. And by prosecutors taking to the media, it opens a door for defense attorneys to have to take it there too.
That is such an excellent point, Gigi. You are forced to do something as a defense lawyer you don't want to do in order to even the scales. And that's where I think judges should be employing gag orders more often. Guys, we got to take a break, but we got developments on that Capitol police officer that shot Ashley Babbitt. We'll talk about that on the other end. Sure, everybody remembers Ashley Babbitt. She was the first one that went through a broken window, almost getting into the Senate chamber, and she was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer. Obviously, very, very dramatic. They almost breached the actual room where the senators deliberate. So the officer was put in a very difficult situation. Well, like any shooting, an inquiry has to be done as to whether or not there was excessive force used by that police officer. A preliminary investigation conducted by an independent body has found that there will not be charges, but it has not been formalized yet because it has not gone to the Department of Justice for a final sign-off. Joseph, I want to go to you first. You've handled a lot of forensic cases. I mean, a lot of people have been debating whether or not shooting in this circumstance was appropriate. But given the gravity of what could have happened to our heads of state, this officer felt that there was a need to do this for the protection of himself and others. And Ashley Babbitt was the first one through the window, and it, in fact, halted many people from following her. What do you think?
I think at the end of the day, one of the questions I would ask relative to the officer is by what measure did he choose to employ deadly force at this point? Because he shot a woman in the neck and she bled out on the floor. I think that had she demonstrated at that point, if you use force continuum, and that is the baseline for this, did she demonstrate in any way that she was a threat to his life? And there were other police officers that were there. Could they have used a less lethal means? When I first saw the videography of this thing, it's kind of deceptive because you can't really appreciate what his perspective was on this in relation to her breaching this area. Did he randomly fire? How did he identify her as a specific threat? And I think that at the end of the day, that's what this comes down to. Going back to what we had already said about speaking to the media and releasing information like this, I think that it's probably inappropriate at this moment in time for the Metropolitan Police to release preliminary information when the Justice Department has not signed off on this yet. Because now people are assuming that there will be no charges filed, that there will be no further investigation. These are two separate entities, Bob. We have a local law enforcement agency, the Metropolitan Police Department, that's conducting this investigation. And then this is occurring on federal property, and the Justice Department is the one that's going to sign off on it. So it's a very interesting issue. You know, generally it happens in the reverse. Police shootings that I work or have worked in my past have been local law enforcement agencies that shoot someone, and then the feds come in and take a look at things like civil rights violations relative to use of force. So I'm going to be very interested moving forward to see how this actually kind of plays out.
Yeah, you make a very good point about releasing a preliminary investigation when many times and most times you try to get investigative information and you're always barred by the idea of, no, sorry, it's under investigation. So the fact it wasn't signed off on is somewhat squirrely in my mind. But Gigi, I want to talk to you a little bit more about
this information. It's very quickly. I've worked cases where law enforcement agents have shot individuals, and there was an 8-month lag sometimes before information was released. So yeah, this is the speed with which this is being done is kind of shocking as well.
Okay, Gigi, Joseph mentions the use of force continuum. And the use of force continuum is something that police officers are trained about. Your uniform itself is part of the use of force continuum. The fact that you have a gun, verbal commands is the next thing on the use of force continuum. Going from there is the use of physical force, then mechanical force, and then mechanical force would be like asps and batons and pepper spray and less than lethal objects, and then your weapon. But look, I mean, to this investigation, there was mayhem breaking out there. They were giving verbal commands to back off. They were using mechanical force that was not working. I mean, at what point do you get to, do you just let them go in and just take over? I mean, that's my point of view with this. And the legal question I've had, does it make a difference in your mind, Gigi, that these are heads of state that are entitled to, I know this may sound controversial, to maybe more protection to make sure that our government isn't obliterated, because we need these people in order to function as a society? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, listen, we've got a building filled with our freely elected leaders, and you have hundreds of folks who are calling to hang them, and they're using, significant force to break into the building that these freely elected leaders are in, and they want to go and hang them, and they've got nooses, and they've got bombs, and they've got guns, and they're breaking down barricades that were built up as another protective layer. And, I'm always on this show, and I'm always, I think I've made a pretty strong reputation of saying that the police need to be trained to control themselves in this situation. But I got to be honest with you, I have never seen a more clear-cut presentation where the officer is in reasonable danger of his life, and he's also there's also a reasonable threat to assume that the lives of our freely elected leaders are also on the line. And Ashley Babbitt, at the end of the day, is leading the riot, breaking through the window and climbing through it as they're all chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." I mean, is an officer, we would think it was wild if the officer didn't shoot into this crowd and try to stop them from breaching this barricade.
Right, and she had former military training as well. Very well stated, Gigi. Let's switch gears a little bit. A very famous private investigator by the name of Jack Palladino has died. And the interesting thing is he was in the middle of a robbery. Two folks were robbing. He had a camera, and they were trying to get his camera, and that camera they never got may very well, interestingly, be the piece of evidence prosecutors say that even though he's dead, he's still solving his own murder. Let's listen to Anjanette Levy from the Law and Crime Network with respect to what this case is about.
Mr. Palladino was a San Francisco legend, someone who dedicated his career to pursuing justice and truth.
San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Bodine vowing justice for Jack Palladino. Palladino was a private eye for President Bill Clinton during the Jennifer Flowers scandal. He worked for Robin Williams and Courtney Love. Palladino also investigated the Jonestown massacre, and Patty Hearst hired him to investigate her kidnapping. He also looked into the background of a prosecution witness in one of R. Kelly's criminal cases.
He was a consummate raconteur and a great character, a dear, dear friend, and I'll mourn his loss the rest of my life.
Friends of Palladino say he always had a camera, and last week was no different when he saw something strange outside of his home.
Witnesses on the scene reported seeing a suspect in the passenger side of a vehicle in a physical struggle over Mr. Palladino's camera. During the struggle, the vehicle sped away, causing Mr. Palladino to fall to the ground.
Palladino suffered a head injury that took his life. He had taken photos of what he had found suspicious.
Here, Mr. Palladino, an investigator to the very last day of his life, to the very last act of his life, took photos that helped confirm police work identifying the two assailants in this case.
Joseph, it would be quite amazing and great irony, the two men that have been arrested, if they were to be convicted because of photographs found on this famous investigator's, private investigator's camera. Do you know this gentleman or of his reputation, Joseph?
Yeah, I certainly knew of him. Anybody that's involved in investigations has heard of him, particularly these high-profile cases. I think, reflectively, when I was looking back over his career, and this harkens back to my childhood, one of the things that I was kind of interested in was the fact that he had been involved in the investigation of the Symbionese Liberation Army in San Francisco, I think relative to Patty Hearst kidnapping. And that gives you kind of a benchmark in time for how long he had been around. I found it particularly ironic that they're attempting to rob him of the tools which he made his living. How many of us, walk around with these things in our hands all the time? You rarely hear people carrying cameras. And this was his bread and butter. This is how he made his living. And they're attempting to take this from him. And in his last conscious acts, before he sustained this horrible head injury, he's depressing the shutter on this thing, and it's snapping off images of these individuals. And yeah, it's rife with irony, I think, all the way down the line, and probably emblematic of a life that he led.
Right. Gigi, that's maybe a good time now to educate our audience on the term felony murder and what it means with respect to even the person who may have been involved in the robbery, but that was not the person who actually shot or actually pushed him down and caused the injuries that ultimately led to his death. Talk to us about felony murder.
Yeah, so whenever you're in the commission of an inherently dangerous crime and a death occurs during the commission of that inherently dangerous crime, then your charges is going to be up to felony murder, right? So even though these two gentlemen, I say that loosely, attempted to merely rob him of his camera, Jack Palladino ended up dying due to this interaction. He fell and hit his head on the pavement. So now, once the medical examiner comes back with a cause of death, which is going to be that he hit his head on the sidewalk and suffered a head injury that caused his death, and he suffered that head injury due to the defendant's actions in this case when they tried to rob him, that's going to up their charges from attempted murder to felony murder.
Yes, and I would always say felony murder was the ace card in my back pocket as a prosecutor because I didn't have to prove intention. I don't have to prove premeditation. I don't have to prove knowingly or purposefully. I can have that back ace card right there. And many times it was a savior for us as prosecutors. Great stuff. Never thought in a million years, folks, that I would be looking up something when I got my cases for today called Holly Boob. But here we are. We'll talk about it on the other end of the break.
And something that we've always stood by with our content is trying to step ourselves up. So none other than Julie Rose hit me up and said, "Yo, let's prank the entire state of California. Let's prank Hollywood." Of course, I'm down. I've set aside like a week to try to coordinate one of the craziest stunts that's ever happened in California in terms of publicity, in terms of pranking the state.
Okay, so we know that iconic sign, Hollywood, that's up there. They created a tarp. This was like an actual operation where they had it Holly Boob there. I think you can see the hardest part, if we could keep that clip up there from what I gather, is the B's and the O's, making sure that they were able to get them properly done. Apparently took a lot of work for them. They're only charged with vandalism because the sign actually wasn't damaged. And they seem to be very proud of the work that they did. Jack Tenney, who you just heard there, admitting that it was a prank. Others were trying to say it was to raise awareness for breast cancer. We'll see how that plays out. But he's a YouTuber, and Julia Rose is an Instagram model, as they call it. And she's very excited about the fact that she's had 9,500 hits on that. And I've got to say, I love this quote from Tenney that he put out there. Thank you for the proof again for the prosecutor. Tenney sent out a social media message that said, "We did that expletive, the ultimate boob job." Okay. So, Gigi, we got to take a laugh here, right? I mean, we deal with really serious cases. You know, I get it. It's a violation of law. These people are unabashed. Tenney said he knew they were going to get arrested and actually thanked the police for being very kind to them. So they pulled the prank off. And apparently it's a very significant operation with multiple people traveling across states in order to get the job done. And they did it. I'm thinking that they're going to be seen as icons in the social media world, not criminals.
Yeah, this is going to get them a lot of clout. And, you know, these are interesting defendants because, you know, they're happy to confess what they did. They want you to know what they did. And at the end of the day, this is a misdemeanor trespassing. They didn't damage the sign. They just they threw up Holly Boob to bring recognition to their brand. And ultimately, it also had the benefit of raising awareness for breast cancer, which was, you know, a ripple effect of their prank. You know, so I guess all they have to hope for now is that the prosecutor doesn't go tit for tat in the sentencing here.
Joseph Scott Morgan, I always knew that it was your career highlight to be talking about a Holly Boob case, so I'm turning it over to you, my friend. What are your thoughts?
Hey, listen, they want to do something for breast cancer at Jacksonville State University. We've got a great pre-med program. We've got multiple medical schools that are around. They can go to school, get their medical degree, and they can work on breast cancer research all they want. You know, for me, I don't know. It seems like a lot of effort for something that is going to pass pretty quickly. I have my suspicions as to whether or not that was their actual motivation. You know, to do this. They did draw attention. I was looking at her Twitter, and she's already got like 624,000 followers, I think. And this is going to put, you know, more, you know, emphasis on her and what she's all about, you know. So I don't know. I guess this will be her lasting legacy.
Gigi, I mean, people like to get more followers. I like to have more followers. Have you contemplated any kind of maneuvers like this in order to get out there? Because, you know, it's kind of weird. It reminds me a little bit of like Americans always love the bad boy or the bad woman. They're the Bonnie and Clydes. They can revile them, but this is far less serious, but a little bit more funny. What do you think about the idea that we're going to be seeing a lot more people trying to outdo this?
You know, personally, when I want social media clout, I just come up to Law and Crime with my friend Bob Bianchi and everyone here at the network. But for other folks, they feel like they have to prank an entire state. You know, let's look at the risk reward benefit here. Yeah, it was risky climbing up the side of a mountain to vandalize a beloved Hollywood sign. They're going to be slapped with a misdemeanor for it. They're going to have to pay a criminal defense lawyer for it. But what's that investment? Maybe like a couple $1,000s in total for the possible deals that are going to come and the thousands of followers that will engage with her and put her in a position to make more money. I mean, yeah, sounds like a pretty good deal for them. I don't know if I'd do it, but to each their own. That's why we have jobs, Bob.
Yeah, well, there may actually be a problem if you were to do it, Gigi. Something tells me if you were so inclined that there would be people from the Bar Association that would be knocking on your door because no matter how you look at it, lawyers can't be involved in any kind of crimes like that. Guys, you were awesome guests today. As always, we really appreciate you being here. I hope everybody stays tuned for our regularly scheduled programming. You can find me at rbianchiesq. Have a great rest of the week.